Welcome to STR Pricing Secrets. This series is powered by Host Planet and Beyond, the global leader in revenue management for vacation rentals. This series is your go-to guide for mastering pricing strategies that maximize your earnings, whether you're a seasoned host or just starting out. We'll break down the latest trends, expert insights, and actionable tips to help you boost occupancy, increase revenue, and stay ahead in the ever-changing short-term rental market. Ready to unlock the secrets to smarter pricing? Let's dive in. In today's episode, we'll focus on how to utilize both tech and expertise to boost revenue at your vacation rental. And with me to run through all the essentials on this topic is Charlie Gibbons, sales manager at Beyond and the country lead for the UK and Ireland. How's it going, Charlie?
Yeah, it's going great, James. Thanks very much for having me. How are you?
It's a real pleasure. Yeah, I am very well, thank you. Okay, then, what would your message be to STR operators who are not utilizing automation? Would you say that they're being left behind?
So I always encourage my team, to think the same way. And I always operate from the perspective that, property managers, owners alike, they'll always have a better understanding of the nuances of their business. And if they're property managers working on the behalf of owners, their owners' expectations as well as their listings, right? Equally, I acknowledge I'm biased, right? I work for Beyond, so naturally I'm a fan of automation. But to answer your question honestly, regardless of that, yeah, I'd absolutely say that SDR operators that aren't leveraging automation today maybe aren't being left behind. Maybe the way I'd put it is saying leaving money on the table, especially when you consider the evolution we've seen across the markets, across the globe over the past few years, but certainly true in the UK as well. And truthfully, very much the case post-COVID. So the example I can give is most property managers, as an example today, understand opportunity versus risk that's presented to them within their markets. And one of the most obvious examples of that is how seasonality changes in their market. And that's great, right? Their understanding is key. But the reality is, even across the highest demand periods in any year, demand isn't always the same as it was previously the last year, and even during the same period of the same year, either side of a particular point. So, comparing one weekend in the third week of August versus the second, you shouldn't assume the level of demand is always going to be the same, or at least the same as it was in previous years. So the reality is, if you're not leveraging an RMS like Beyond, you're not dynamically pricing, even if you're the most expert property manager with decades worth of experience, the reality is you probably got between 8 and in some cases even 18 unique seasons across your pricing rates throughout the year. If you then compare that to somebody who's using a platform like Beyond, the way that we treat each price for each individual day is calculated based on the unique level of demand for each one of those days. So you take 8 to 18 seasons, and now all of a sudden, if you're using our tool, you're pricing for 365 days worth of unique seasons, right? If the algorithm that drives that price as well is based on a rich data set, naturally, I'd like to believe that Beyond offers the most sophisticated and accurate data set in the market. What we're going to help you do as those prices evolve based on evolving demand, is find those increments over time that in the end culminate into what is revenue lift for your business, but ultimately the difference when you put into perspective what's the impact of automation when somebody's leveraging dynamic pricing versus maybe somebody who's sticking, not twisting, when they compare to how they've worked in previous years. But I hope that makes sense.
It certainly does. Yeah. So how does Beyond strike the right balance between automation and utilizing the human expertise of property managers?
It's a great question. And naturally, it's one that we love to answer here at Beyond. But I guess forgive me for repeating myself first. It goes back to the first point I made, which is we may be experts in what we do. We may be experts from a data science and dynamic pricing perspective. But that doesn't mean that we understand the nuance of your listings, your owners, their expectations, as well as the uniqueness each listing offers within the market better than our clients. So we balance automation through the concept of partnership, I guess. And what we layer in across our service is human-centric expertise and resources around the tool. To ensure that those nuances, right, are translated effectively, not just into the recommendations we make, but making sure that that is, again, unique to each individual listing and its individual performance within any given market it sits. To kind of give you a bit more meat on the bone, that's in the form of onboarding managers who guide our new clients through what is typically, the first critical 4 weeks, I would say, of the onboarding process. It's very much a calibration period, and you only get one chance to make a good first impression, right? So it's critical that in that time we're translating the feedback of our clients about their nuances, about how goals change depending on the listings, and that's passed through to our revenue management team. That then ultimately that culminates in, again, adapting our recommendations in line with those nuances, as well as ultimately what we're seeing as that listings performance relative to the market it sits.
How do you deal with those property managers who are worried about relying too much on automation, worried that it might diminish their expertise? I'm sure you deal with revenue management people from property management companies who maybe they don't trust the dynamic pricing tools, or maybe they don't want to be out of a job. But how do you address those concerns?
So, appreciate the question and respect anybody who approaches, the concept of change with, you could say healthy, curious skepticism. The best first point to make is that no dynamic pricing tool today, Beyond included, should ever be treated as a set and forget solution. I think if you're taking a hands-off approach when you're making a change to dynamic pricing, it's naturally going to not just diminish, their own expertise if they're a property manager with a lot of experience, but it's also going to diminish the ROI in terms of what you can expect from any RMS, especially in terms of Beyond. That's true. Often I feel that for those that are at least skeptical, let's say, about the meaningful impact automation can represent for them, if they're using the best tools in the right way, it's more coming from a place of leveraging automation in order to empower what they're doing. But often I feel like the concern isn't diminishing their expertise. It's more so a concept of, a fear of losing control is probably the best way to put it. And that makes sense because, people with several years, decades worth of experience, they put their blood, sweat and tears into these things in order to make them as successful as possible. For those that are concerned, I'll always come back to this analogy. Building the most effective dynamic pricing strategy as part of your overall revenue management strategy is a bit like painting a work of art. It requires several inputs over time, like brushstrokes, and often that requires finessing as you look to create the most impactful picture possible. But what did the best paintings in the world all have in common? They sit within a frame, right? And this can be likened to the customizations that we offer as well, which ultimately represent the window of acceptability that's defined by these experts that we're talking about to enable that automated strategy to work within those confines and those confines only. Remember, Beyond isn't an entirely outsourced revenue management service. Our clients remain the painter. And we work with them as consultants to provide the most proactive suggestions about how to create the most effective, impactful paintings possible.
Makes a lot of sense. What are the biggest misconceptions out there that people have about using a revenue management system like Beyond?
How long do you have, James? This is an interesting question, but again, one I really love to answer. I guess my first point is what we just said there. It connects to the last question you asked. For me, one of the biggest misconceptions is that by using an automated system like Beyond, you're going to lose control or effectively diminish the inputs your expertise can have in order to get the best possible outcome for your listings and to create the best possible strategies. Again, Beyond is there not just for people who are making a change from non-dynamic solutions into dynamic. They're also there and available and effectively used by the most professionalized organizations in the market with some of the most expert revenue managers available. For me, again, we're here to empower what people do and to help them take the next step. It's not a case of coming in and telling people that in any way that they've been doing it wrong and dynamic pricing is the right way to go. If in the end, what we're able to create is a strong partnership, that's going to keep your business thriving. That's going to keep your owners happy, and ultimately, that's going to keep you satisfied with the tools that you use. There are a few others. So again, I hope you don't mind me going on. Shut me up, James, if I'm rambling. But I also believe there's a bit of a misconception that dynamic pricing's overall goal is to simply increase rates or, for lack of a better word, gouge the market. The reality is what we're looking to build for property managers, owners alike, are sustainable dynamic pricing strategies, right? And our job is to help you create what is the most accurate price at the right time that evolves proactively based on the level of demand in your market. So just think about what that actually means, right? We're helping property managers fight for more occupancy during periods of low demand, even during higher demand periods. Compare Monday versus Friday. Typically, it's going to be harder to book that Monday than it is on that Friday. But likewise, yes, it's true as well. In high demand periods, we help property managers identify opportunities to capitalize them. But again, coming back to the one word that's most important, to do it in a sustainable way, right? There's something that's quite close to beyond that I'd love to kind of just spend a moment on as well, is that sometimes I do hear that property managers, even people who are using Beyond or using other providers, they kind of think that the data that powers algorithms is the same across the board because they know that all providers, most providers, I should say, are leveraging some form of scraped data from OTAs. I suppose this is where I really want to stake my flag in the ground. Like, unlike many of our competitors, as a simple example, we also don't leverage third parties to supplant our understanding of demand. Our data pipeline is owned entirely in-house. It's been managed by more than a decade by our data scientists who have themselves, right, several decades worth of collective experience in revenue management alone. And Beyond is the only provider in the industry that also offers you the ability to couple, right, the data pipeline that we use to drive our algorithm, even with people's consumer search traffic that's coming from their direct websites. So, again, if you've got a growing direct business, you've got nuanced demand that comes through there. We're the only provider within our data layers that's actually injecting that into the algorithm, so you can capitalize on the let's say the varying demand from your website versus what's also happening on the OTAs too. For me, I think they're kind of some of the three major points. But if anybody's out there, come and speak to our team. Don't be afraid to come and share your concerns, and we'll always be happy to talk to you about the realities of Beyond. And as always, you'll be the best judge of what makes the most sense for your business.
Absolutely. And we'll put links in the show notes so people can get in touch with the team at Beyond. Charlie, let's move on to emerging trends. We're talking just about second quarter of 2025. What's been happening so far this year? And what are the key things that hosts and property managers need to know about in relation to revenue management?
So I promise this isn't a plug, James, but the first thing I'll always say is that, again, demand is unique, not just to a city like London, but demand is unique to the very specific markets, even within a place like London. So I think if people are really interested to understand the most compelling, let's say, stats, insights, come and have a chat with us. We're always happy to offer you an insight into what's happening within any specific market, because again, there are always nuances. But I would say broadly, if we think about the industry, the word on everyone's lips, for me at least, based on who I've been speaking to this year, is booking lead time. Okay. Especially post-COVID. And again, this is why looking forward into the future and comparing demand pacing is so important, is that booking trends have changed dramatically and, aren't always consistent with what's been happening in the previous year. I would say people are very aware of the fact that guests are continuing to look, let's say, more opportunistically about how they book their stays. That means in many markets, booking lead times are changing. More people are probably asking themselves with their partners or their families, when's the right time to go and do we hold out? And naturally that should impact how people are subsequently evolving their rates dynamically throughout the year. So broadly, I'm hearing booking lead times are shrinking. That needs not just an emphasis on how your rates are changing within that booking lead time, but that also extends to how people are pricing for last minute bookings, because unless you're using a tool that automates last minute discounts, it can be pretty hard to stay on top of because, again, it kind of changes every single day. As well as that, I think it's fair to say, how consumers are booking, ultimately their stays is changing. We talked a lot about the future of the stays industry. I think the reality is people are becoming more empowered through certain tools. The use of AI is becoming more prevalent. And naturally, that is impacting how people are ultimately finding the listings that they're looking to book and where they're looking to book. As well as that, there are kind of two other points for me. Flexibility in minimum stays is really critical and key. Going back to that point about people being more opportunistic in the way that they book, normally that means that they're looking for shorter stays. You know, if you and the partner have a little bit of time over the weekend, you see the opportunity. That's how a lot of bookings are coming through at the moment. So if you're in traditional summer markets, you're used to in summer offering, let's say, more traditional, higher minimum stays. I'd really encourage everybody at the moment, especially ahead of Easter, to think about whether or not there's an opportunity. Either it requires you to sit down with your owner or something you can control yourself to be a bit more flexible with the minimum stays that you're offering. And finally, everybody is, I'm sure, very keen to grow this part of their business, but the prevalence and the opportunity that's represented in terms of direct business, it's never been more powerful than ever before. I myself recognize the value that the OTAs bring to our industry, and I'm sure many people do too. But the concept of building your own personal brand, injecting that into your direct website, and ultimately marketing yourself as a business has never been a more powerful tool when you think about how can I grow revenue year over year. So really encourage everybody to think about experience in terms of the experience that they're offering with their listings and how they're marketing that, but also experience of themselves as a brand and how they're marketing their business across their direct websites and how they're driving people to it. It's never been more important than it is now.
Yeah, things we talk about a lot. Being flexible and encouraging those direct bookings. It's going to help you get more reservations, increase your occupancy, increase your profits. Exactly. It's kind of common sense in this fairly tough market as we're in at the moment. Maximize your holiday let revenue with Beyond. Are you leaving money on the table with outdated pricing? Beyond is the global leader in revenue management for short-term rentals, helping hosts and property managers boost revenue by up to 35%. With real-time market insights, automated pricing updates, and AI-driven strategies, Beyond takes the guesswork out of setting rates so you can earn more while doing less. Join thousands of successful hosts who price smarter, fill more nights, and maximize profits. Try Beyond today and watch your revenue soar. Visit beyondpricing.com to get started. Charlie, then talk to us about new customers. When new property managers come on board, just talk to us about the onboarding experience and what it's like joining a platform like Beyond.
Sure. I guess maybe we should split this question in two. Let's talk a little bit about people who are thinking, right, about dynamic pricing and potentially not yet at that point where they're willing to look, maybe because they're not sure how or where to go. I think the first point is to have a clear understanding of your own decision-making process. What do you need to know in order to feel comfortable to move forward with any platform? Put Beyond to one side for one moment. What makes the most sense for you? And what's the key criteria that you want to assess when you're evaluating the relevance of any provider? Also be clear on the level of support that any provider is going to offer you. I would really encourage everyone to, seek to understand the enablement journey, so to speak, from any provider that they're willing to create for you, and make sure that it kind of fits the bill, right? Make sure that you're satisfied with the answers that you're getting. I think also it's fair to say evaluate any provider's understanding of your local markets. Again, you're the experts, so be curious to understand how their data reflects, let's say, trends based on your experience. You're the best judge of how accurate this is or is not, for that matter. Ultimately, I would be looking and encouraging people to work with providers that are upfront with their data insights and are prepared to show their experience in how they depict that data, and make sure it makes sense for you and make sure that it compares to your experience too. As well as that, it goes without saying, spend time evaluating not just the upfront cost, but the cost of investment, if you compare it to the return on investment, and validate based on your evaluation whether the value you've identified makes you confident in any system's ability to deliver on the ROI and, of course, reach and seek to go above that break even. Likewise, maybe one of the final points is don't be afraid to ask for help. Whether it's managing discussions with your owners, we appreciate that can kind of be a bit of a daunting prospect for anybody who's not dynamically pricing and consider the change. But also ask for help around how to manage internal stakeholders. Leverage the potential suppliers you're working with to help you articulate the value proposition if you're bought in. But likewise, ask for help around resources that can also help owners there understand what does that change represent for them, whether or not they're going to lose any form of control, and ultimately what the outcomes that they can come to expect. I suppose then the second part of that question, if you'll forgive me, James, and I hope you don't mind, I am monologuing a bit. I like to talk. Is the onboarding journey that Beyond offers. So remember what I said. Beyond recognizes that you're only going to get one opportunity to make the best first impression. And that's just as true when you think about dynamic pricing in general as it is about making the right best impression for your owners too when you're coming on board with a new system. So for our contracted users, what we're offering is a dedicated onboarding service. It's fully included within the cost of our fees, no extras, no hiddens. We're going to connect you with a dedicated team of onboarding managers, experts in their field who understand, let's say, people's concerns coming in and also recognize what enablement is most important and when it's most important to deliver it, typically through what is a 4-week onboarding journey. Behind the scenes, our revenue managers are working to analyze each one of your listings for you. So before any prices are launched, that analysis gets taken in and ultimately spat out in terms of recommendations, which is presented to you for your review. And only when you're satisfied with what's been presented do we launch and go ahead. But it's a calibration period. So what are we doing? We're constantly reanalyzing performance of the listing relevant to the market and relevant to its own unique attributes. And let's say revising our recommendations over a 4-week period to ensure that not just your listings are in the best place at the end of onboarding, but you yourself are in the best place to understand, let's say, how can I use this tool to my greatest advantage and how do I get the most out of the partnership? In between onboarding and let's say the end of any term, of course, you're going to be working with dedicated customer success managers. We obviously have a scaled offering in terms of our service relative to the size of any one business, but that's simply so we ensure that, let's say, regardless of your size, we don't let that impact in any way the quality of the service that we deliver. And again, working in the scenes continuously are our data scientists to optimize the algorithm and our revenue managers to optimize the performance of each one of your listings. But I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense. And let's finish then with the $64,000 question, which is if you're a property manager and you've not been using dynamic pricing and you start using it, what's the expected impact?
I think that's a great question. So remember, again, no dynamic pricing tool in the world is a set and forget. And I think anybody who starts with dynamic pricing and expects it to work almost like an outsourced service, that's going to negatively impact the results that you're ultimately able to achieve. However, somebody coming from a non-dynamic pricing solution, moving to dynamic pricing, let's say with Beyond and working in combination with our services, on average, what we're seeing over a 12-month period is a 24% lift for non-dynamic pricing users. People who are working with other dynamic pricing tools and moving to Beyond, on average, we're seeing a 16 to 18% increase year over year. But again, it's all about how you buy into the partnership, how much effort that you put into the platform, and how well you work with us, and ultimately the resources, the recommendations we make in order to make sure that that number grows as much as possible.
Well, those percentages sound pretty good to me. Charlie, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for joining us on STR Pricing Secrets.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, James.
Great to chat to Charlie Gibbons there from Beyond. Those expected revenue increases certainly sound good to me. If you're not utilising dynamic pricing for your short-term rentals, give it a go. All right, that's it for today's episode of STR Pricing Secrets. Remember, this series is sponsored by Beyond, and if you'd like to try their dynamic pricing tool, head to beyondpricing.com. For more free education tips and trends from the STR industry, visit houseplanner.club, where you can sign up for our newsletter, listen to our podcasts, and download a suite of ebooks for hosts and property managers. That's it for today's episode of STR Pricing Secrets. Until next time, happy hosting.